Thank you very much, Gertrude, for your introduction, and thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. In my presentation, I will try not only to give you the overview of the content into the guidelines on the right to water in Africa, but also I will try to make my presentation in a way it is structured to help you to have an idea on how you can use these guidelines for your work in advocacy, in monitoring, and also in supporting. My presentation will not give you only the overview of what is the content into the guidelines, but also will help you to have an idea how you can shape up your opinions, your way of supporting those in need of support when there is a violation of the right to water, using your human rights analysis. So now, to start, the right to water, the human rights to water, what does it mean? I mean, from the perspective of the African context. So the human right to water entitles everyone to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water for personal, domestic, and agricultural uses. Water should be treated as a social and cultural good and not primarily as an economic good. So basically, this understanding comes from the paragraph 88 on the principles and guidelines on the implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And then from this understanding, so you can find how it has been reflected under the paragraph 12 of the guidelines on the right to water in Africa. And then from this perspective, you can see that there are several legal content, because when you say water should be sufficient and safe, this is a legal content. So because if something happened and you are making your human rights analysis, so you have to pay attention whether if somebody claims that his or her right to water has been violated, maybe was this about unsafety, was about insufficiency of water. So there are legal content into that understanding. So these elements of the legal content are sufficiency and safety, acceptability, physical accessibility, affordability, and social and culture good versus primary economic good. So basically, what does it mean? When we say sufficiency and safety, and when you see what is in the guidelines, you can read it, for instance, in the paragraph 13. There are also other paragraphs you can use for your analysis. But in the paragraph 13.2, states shall ensure that everyone has equitable access to amount of water that is sufficient for a dignified life, safe and clean. So there are really a lot of things here to take a look at. Water should be safe and clean. I was last time in Togo, and I was visiting a community, and somebody was showing me, because there's a huge, they're practicing this mining for phosphate, and he was showing me a cup of water, and you could see really how this water was kind of contaminated because of this activity on mining of phosphate. So water should be clean and safe. And for instance, in the paragraph 16.5, it says that in case of water pollution, states shall mitigate the damage and protect the affected person's rights, remedies shall be provided as expeditiously as possible. So when you are making your human rights analysis, and when something happens somewhere and you want to raise the voice in terms of monitoring and advocacy, so these paragraphs can help you to shape up your opinion and your position. So I should also remind you that these are guidelines, because somebody would question if these guidelines are binding. So these guidelines are based on instruments that have been ratified by states, including the Charter or the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So this means these guidelines are not coming out of blue. They are based on legal instruments, human rights instruments that have been ratified by states. So if you refer to these guidelines and something happens somewhere and you want to support those victims or those affected by the violation of the right to water, so any paragraph you will cite in the guidelines has a meaning, and has meaning and based on instruments that have been ratified by states, including the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So this was on sufficiency and safety, and these paragraphs can be so important when you are making your human rights analysis. And the other legal content is acceptability. So what does it mean? For instance, in the paragraph 16.1, state must prevent the pollution of water supply by agricultural, industrial activities, as well as wastewater. Water provided for domestic and personal use in homes and public spaces must be of an acceptable color, odor, and taste. Acceptability shall be defined by the water users. So those who are using the water should be the one to say if the water is really acceptable to be used. So if you are making a human rights analysis and you are confronted by the issue that people or those affected do not really are questioning about the safety and acceptability of water, so these paragraphs, including the 16.1, which is kind of cross-cutting, could be very helpful. And then it comes to physical accessibility. So for the physical accessibility, there are two important paragraphs, like the paragraph 14.1, which said that states shall ensure safe, physical, and equitable access to water facilities or services that provide sufficient, safe, and regular water. In addition, states shall ensure that water services and the facilities are safely accessible to all. And in some cases in Africa, when it comes, for instance, to land grabbing or forced evictions, you know that women are mostly the most really affected by such activities, because you know women are the center in African society in terms of really providing food, in terms of ensuring that everybody at home is comfortable. So this means when you have these forced evictions and people are really pushed away from their lands or their places where they used to live, most of the time women are the one to go far to fetch the water. And in some cases, you have been documenting, there are sometimes women or young girls really facing some issues when boreholes or where they want to fetch water in the rivers are far from their homes. So in this regard, these paragraphs are very important when you are making human rights analysis, whether the physical accessibility is safe, and if it is possible, if people do not make kilometers or far away from their homes to find water. So the next legal content element is affordability. So water should be affordable. Here we are talking about the price. How do you afford to pay the bill that you have water which is sufficient and safe? So the paragraph 15 and point 1 should be very important, because state shall ensure that water is affordable to all. The cost of water shall not mean that people have to go without other essential goods and services for the realization of human rights, such as food and health care. So people should not think twice when they want to pay the water, that they have to either to pay water and miss food or health care. So basically, in other words, it means the price paid to access water should be affordable to everyone. Even the paragraph 15, for instance, the paragraph 15.5 says that full water disconnection. So in case somebody really will not be able to pay the bill, they say the paragraph 15.5 said full water disconnection may only be permissible for no payment if the person unable to pay can access an alternative source. So this means there's no way you can really disconnect. So let's say the companies or the public services which are managing the water, they cannot disconnect the water if someone doesn't have an alternative source. But when the individuals, and that is 15.6 paragraph, so when the individual has the actual ability to pay but did not, so the person has the ability to pay but did not, so this disconnection of water applies only after timely notification at least 1 month in advance of the planned disconnection. So you can see really these paragraphs could be very important when you deal with those issues of affordability and disconnection of water and so on. And then you have this other element, which is social and cultural goods. So in African context, water is seen as a social and cultural good rather than a primary economic good. So this means, for instance, from the paragraph 1.5, that states shall protect water resources, including springs, streams, and lakes that are culturally significant to the local and traditional communities or to the country at large. So the cultural significance by the riparian communities, so the riparian communities here refers to a group of people sharing access to the same river basin, shall be respected and taken into consideration during the human rights impact assessment. You know, always when you have this big project activities, you have always this human rights impact assessment. So we will see a bit later when it comes to transparency and the participation of communities. Because all this kind of stuff should be taken into consideration, traditional community, local and traditions of communities. So state shall promote ways to ensure that water collected from rivers, wells, springs, and rainwater harvesting is protected and is safe for customary and religious practices. So the aspect of culture and traditions are very, very key. So, and in human rights analysis, take a look on those issues when there is a forced evictions or when there is this big project that will have an impact on communities. So in this kind of human rights impact assessment, so to pay attention on that particular aspect on traditions and cultural aspects is absolutely very key. So then, because of this, what we are discussing here are human rights issues. So then, if human rights and especially the right to water is violated, someone has to be held accountable. So this requires, if someone has to be held accountable, there are some aspects which we call here obligations, and to be looked at when you're making human rights analysis. And we know that states, governments have the sole responsibility to ensure the compliance of human rights obligations. So this means when there is a violation of human rights, especially in this case, the right to water, state should be held accountable. So then individuals or companies which or private, non-state actors, when they are involved and they are part of abusing these human rights in terms of abusing the right to water or human rights, so then in this case, they should be brought before the court of law. And this could be the civil, this could be done through the civil case or penal case. But the primary responsible to ensure that human rights are upheld are states. So in these obligations of states to ensure that human rights, in this case, the right to water is respected or protected, you have a set of two obligations. You have the general obligations and you have core obligations. For general obligations, you have several levels. You have the progressive realization, you have mobilization of resources, you have no discrimination and equal access, you have assurance of access to remedy, and you have cooperation. So what does it mean? So when a state ratifies a treaty or becomes a party to the Charter, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, and recognize the right to water as a human right, so it has to think or to plan how this water, this right will be implemented at the national level. So it is not a matter only for ratification or signing the document and everything's done. No, there should be some process to ensure that that ratification should be really reflected at the national level and becomes a reality that people enjoy. In this case, enjoy the right to water. So this is why in the paragraph, for instance, 34 and point 1, state shall adopt legislative, policy, administrative, judicial, and financial and other measures to ensure that the right to water is implemented. So it becomes a reality that people living in the territory of that state enjoy the right to water. So to make it happen, there should be all these kind of mechanisms. There should be a legal framework that recognize that right to water. So that's why this paragraph 34, it is point 1 is very key. And in your reporting, for instance, if you have the observer status and you can, for instance, report to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, so your report could be really mentioning whether the state has put up in place those legal frameworks to ensure that the right to water at national level is implemented, is enjoyed. And for instance, the paragraph 34.2, state shall adopt an integrated water strategy that links water with sanitation, health, education, satisfactory environment, and other cross-cutting rights. So having this integrated water strategy is very key, because at the end of the day, the state should make sure that there's a progressive way of ensuring how this water will be enjoyed, and there should be some benchmark ways of assessing how this water will be enjoyed. And for instance, the paragraph 34.3 stipulates that state shall set targets at the national or regional level for extending services and facilities and prioritize communities with currently little or no access. So of course, in this targeting, how the state will progressively realize the right water, there should be targets, how and in which kind of framing water will be realized. And then you have to realize the water, it doesn't come out of blue. You need to put the governments or states should really put on the table, should have idea on how this should be, the right water should be realized. So this requires resources, human and financial resources. And this is why, for instance, this paragraph 34.4 is very key, that the state shall mobilize financial and human resources available to attain the objectives, targets, and goals, and allocate resources appropriately according to institutional responsibility. And if a state cannot, on one hand, is about really planning, having a strategy, and making sure that will happen. But if this doesn't happen because of several reasons, the state also has the obligation to seek support from other states. You have this bilateral cooperation. You have, this cooperation in terms of development. So it depends really where the government or a state is really putting effort and wants to really to improve in terms of human rights record. In this regard, if the state really wants to, to make sure that the right to water becomes a reality at the national level, so there should be really this mobilization of resources or seek support where it is necessary. So the non-discrimination and equal access, this is one of also element in the general obligation or general obligations. There's no way a state can realize the water if there is a kind of discrimination of some groups or some communities on different bases. This could be, based on the ethnic background, based on, based on political views, based on whatever. So this the realization of the right to water cannot happen if people can enjoy that right, if a state has some policies or some way of discriminating some people on its territory. And this is why, for instance, this paragraph 5.1 is very important, that states shall ensure a non-discriminatory participation to all stakeholders in the water sector, as well as equal access to water and water facilities and services. And the states shall take positive measures to ensure that vulnerable and marginalized groups, so we will see who are these groups, and groups with special needs, including cultural, spiritual, and religious needs, participate in the water sector and have access to water. So no discrimination is very important, and this should not be really done at all. Because, for instance, the paragraph 5.2 says like states shall prohibit any discrimination hindering access to water on the grounds of age, race, ethnic origin, color, sex, gender, sexual orientation, language, religion, political, or any other opinion, national and social origin, economic statutes, birth, health statutes, or other statutes. So basically, there should be no discrimination of any kind if a state wants that its people enjoy the right to water. Assurance of access to remedy, this is another element in the general obligations. This means also, like this paragraph 39.1, the state should put in place appropriate remedies in place, enabling those affected directly or indirectly to obtain redress in cases where the right to water has been violated. And it is very obvious. So if the state has put in place some mechanisms which people can use to claim if their right to water has been violated, so they should be able to be given the remedy for because they're victims of the violation of their right to water. So this is why paragraph 16.1 says remedies shall be provided as expeditiously as possible in the case of water pollution. So I think this is very, very important. And then you have operation. And then this says, for instance, when entering into international and regional engagement, so or bilateral agreements, or undertaking bilateral and multilateral assistance, state must ensure that the right to water is respected, and those with basic access are given priority. So basically, here it means when a state really entering into this bilateral agreements should make sure that its sovereignty on the water is not really violated. Because as you know, some of our governments enter into this kind of bilateral agreements, and somehow you have this pressure from those, let's say, powerful countries or industrialized countries, where they put pressure on some governments and really enter into these bilateral agreements. But at the end of the day, you see that those agreements open up or create such policies at national level, really to open up, let's say, the water market to private companies. And then if you have if you have human rights, really human rights in the hands of those who are only seeking private interest, so it becomes very complicated. It's very hard to ensure that the state will make sure to protect human rights if it has itself put in place those kind of policies that really give those companies to operate without any accountability. So this means when states really enter into those agreements, should really make sure that there is no hidden agenda that really will hinder their human rights record or their human rights, the right to water in this case, at the national level, because of pressure or some other hidden agenda behind those agreements and policies which could come based on those agreements. Of course, we know there's a corruption we will see at the end, and sometimes you know, some authorities or some government officials don't care too much about their citizens, but this should change. And this kind of paragraph is very important when you make your human rights analysis and when you want to show what is behind these bilateral agreements and assistance. Sometimes it becomes as aid or assistance, and at the end we realize that it is not really assistance, rather there's something hidden behind this kind of assistance. So there you pay attention, and this kind of paragraph in the guidelines could be very interesting to support your arguments.
Valentin, sorry to say, but maybe you can speed up a bit, otherwise we may at the end run out of time.
Okay. So you have then these core obligations you find into the paragraph 3.2, which is that states shall respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the right to water, exercised individually, in association with others, or within a community or group. So the respect, it is basically also defined in the paragraph, in the principle and the guidelines on the implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights, and also it is reflected in those paragraphs I put there. And it says that the obligation to respect requires that state parties refrain from interfering directly or indirectly with the enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights. So this entails respecting the freedom of individuals and peoples to use all of the resources at their disposal to meet their economic, social, and cultural needs and obligations. So this means any action and omission from the state which will really interfering with the enjoyment of the right of the water of people should be not happen. This is what these paragraphs are saying. And the obligation to protect, from the same paragraph 7 from this principle guidelines, the obligation to protect requires the state to take positive measures to ensure that no state actors, such as multinational corporations, local companies, private persons, and armed groups, do not violate economic, social, and cultural rights. And you have a set of those paragraphs which can be helpful. So this means an action coming from a no-state actors, so state should be, and which action which will violate the right to water, state should be able to protect its people. This is what it means. And at the same time, should be able to regulate all these companies on private persons when they are involved in management of the water sector. And the obligation to promote, this paragraph 8 stipulates that the duty to promote economic, social, and cultural rights requires state to adopt measures to enhance people's awareness of their rights and to provide accessible information relating to the programs and institutions adopted to realize them. So basically, what is very important is the promote obligation, especially the paragraph 37.1 stipulates that states shall ensure that these guidelines are widely disseminated. So there should be a promotion that people know these guidelines in the country. And then you have the obligation to fulfill, which comes from this paragraph 10 and 11 on this of these principles and the guidelines. That the duty to fulfill the right to water requires state parties to take positive steps to advance the realization of this right. So the right to water. So this means adoption of measures that enable and assist individuals and communities to gain access to the right to water on their own. So this means, for instance, state should not take kind of retrogressive measures when it comes to move forward the right to water. So it should make sure that any policy, any step forward should really mean to promote the realization of the right to water at the country level. So then in your human rights analysis, you can analyze what is going on and can use other elements, which here are human rights principles, and which also have been reflected into the guidelines. So you can see them here. You have the human dignity, you have transparency, you have indivisibility, you have the rule of law, you have the empowerment and participation. And when you have, for human dignity, so basically, as I said before, the guidelines have been really highlighted that under no circumstances, under any circumstance, so individual may be, under no circumstance may an individual be deprived of the minimum essential amount of water for basic human needs or survival. So this means there's no way there's no way somebody will be deprived the right to water if there's no way he or she can get another way of getting it, because living without water means there's a potential there's a potential even for dying. It's just very very bad. So transparency here means any action of state when it comes of making some planning or making decisions or making some implementation of policies, all these should be transparent. And of course, the state should have put in place these administrative and the judicial mechanisms, which are also transparent, to provide remedies where they can provide decisions in a transparent manner, and decisions which are trustful. So, and this is why when it comes to transparency, it is very important. For instance, when you have this big mega project which requires a human rights impact assessment, that people, community members, trust their judicial mechanisms, and also they have means to access it, to access those judicial mechanisms if they are not far or if they are not costly. And states should put in place some ways people can access those judicial mechanisms to challenge anything that's against their enjoyment of the right to water. So then indivisibility means that human rights are indivisible. It means the right to water is connected with other essential, other human rights, like the right to food, the right to health, the right to education, and the right to satisfactory environment. It means the right to water is not seen as an isolated right. It is connected with other essential human rights, which are very important for us. So it means when the right to water is violated, there are other human rights are violated. So to see this holistic understanding, the right to water in this indivisibility of rights is very key when you are making your human rights analysis. And then you have the rule of law, where those who are victims of the violation of the right to water can seek justice, can seek remedies. So this is why states should put in place accountability and the mechanisms. And you can see all these paragraphs I was mentioning there, they're so helpful. So they can help when you are making your arguments. And also we have the African Commission, where you can send your complaint, and also para-reporting. And you have the African Court for on human and people's rights, where you can also access. It depends if your country has accepted the court, but also you can access the court through the African Commission. This is another aspect, how you can access those these regional bodies. But what does it mean in these guidelines? So states should put in place all those mechanisms to ensure the rule of law, where people can access tribunals and courts and seek remedies when they're victims of the right to water. And
but then we have 10 minutes left, just to let you know.
Yes, then you have the empowerment, especially here, the paragraphs are talking about, empowerment of women, empowerment of local governments and authorities to make sure they can implement. This requires resources, this requires capacity building, and yeah, to make sure that, and those paragraphs can be very important. And then, of course, you have participation. As I said before, any implementation, any activities that has an impact on local communities, participation is absolutely very key, that they make sure that prior and informed consent is taken up. And you have these paragraphs are on vulnerable and marginalized groups, and you can read. So you have the homeless people, you have people living in rural areas, you have elderly, people with disability, women, stateless, asylum seekers, refugees, indigenous people. So all these are vulnerable and marginalized groups, and their needs, their special needs should be taken into account when it comes to the realization of the right to water. And of course, you have the benefits sharing. So when there is the water and there is the benefits to be taken out of that water should be equally and fairly shared. And of course, this paragraph speaks about reporting to the African Commission, and you can make para-reporting, you can make human rights analysis, and but you need, of course, to get the observer status, and you can apply to the African Commission. And the last paragraph is about corruption. As I mentioned before, we have an issue of corruption in Africa, and this is why these guidelines has been taken into consideration to put this paragraph on corruption to make sure also that is there. So this is what I was trying to share with you in this the content in these guidelines. I hope you enjoyed it. You can also see, I will share with this with you the PowerPoint. You can read the guidelines. You can get up. You can come back to me if you have any question. And if you have a question, of course, I'm open for discussion. And thank you very much for attending this online seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Valentin, for this very interesting, input and insight in the African guidelines on the right to water. I think you made it very, very clear and understandable. Thanks for that. And we still have some minutes left for questions. So if you, the participants, have questions or comments, please don't feel shy and look at your operating panel. You can see the word questions, and if you click on that, a small window will open and where you can type in questions. Yes, there's already a question coming from someone from Liberia. He said, here's the issue of water insecurity on the increase every day. How can civil society organizations even start to put government feet to the fire with little or no fundings?
The no funding from the civil society organizations or from the state?
I don't know. This is not so clear. Maybe the one who is gentleman from Liberia can add on that. And there's a second question: which countries are putting the guidelines into a body of law? Have countries already reacted to those guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, for the second question is much easier. So I mean, it will be a question of searching and see which country has implemented or has put incorporated this or has put the right to water into the legal framework, because that's what it means. So the guidelines are there to guide, but the essential point is to make sure that the states put the guideline, the right to water into their legal frameworks. But for the question for someone from Liberia, how civil society organization can engage with the state, is the question, Gertrude?
Yes, how can civil society organization put the states under pressure to implement?
So I think the way I can look at this, it will be is first of all is to ask yourself, is the right to water recognized as justiciable in the Liberia legal framework? So if the right to water is not justiciable, or it is not in the legal framework in Liberia, so I think the first step is to make kind of advocacy and put in place, some arguments to force your government to recognize the right to water as a justiciable right, because there's no way you can hold accountable the authorities if the right to water is not recognized in your legal framework. It will be very, very hard. So the first step really is to check if the right to water is in the legal framework in your country. If not, so then there's a room of using these guidelines and really make a kind of advocacy really, and make sure that your claims put forward. And maybe you can even use some cases of violations or some really situations to make your arguments really valid and heard. And then from there, once the right to water is recognized in the legal framework in your country, so then there is a room of monitoring whether the government or the authorities or the government institutions are not violating that right, or making sure that the right is upheld.
Yes, thank you. I don't see. There's another question. Yes. What about the river Niger? There are a lot of different users from different countries. How to guarantee them an equal and fair access to water in the future? And for example, maybe also with the help of sub-regional acting authorities. So a river that flows through different countries, many countries, and many users depend on that water. So,
and this is why very interesting in this guidance you see the benefit sharing. So in those kind of negotiations, so if you have like a Niger River where you have several countries linked or are depending on that river, so there should be a fair sharing. And this, of course, is done through negotiations, through discussions. I don't know to what extent where the negotiations are taking place, but it's very obvious that when it comes to the benefit sharing of the river, so this should be taken into consideration, that no country in those kind of discussions is let's say pushed away from this kind of benefit sharing, in my view.
Yes, thank you. So the moment there are no other questions, then I have also one question.
Yes, please.
Maybe I take the advantage. So now we have the issue was raised of seeking support from other states to implement to realize the right to water for the people. And now let's say we have a lot of donors from Europe, from Northern America. Now, for example, take the case of me. I'm a German citizen. I work in Germany. So the German government gives support, but also supports, for example, extractive industries in Africa. Now, and those industry, according to the guidelines here, what I have learned would say they violate the right of water of local communities. And then now, is the German government somehow also responsible according to those guidelines on the right to water in Africa? So can I also address my government and say, please, in Africa now we have those guidelines on the right to water, and if you support projects, investments, you have also to follow those guidelines. Is that possible or is it weird?
Absolutely, yes. Because this is the extraterritorial obligations. Because if the government the government of Germany is supporting any mining activities somewhere in Africa, or some activities that that have an implication on the realization of the right water. For instance, if there's a contamination of the water based on those mining or this extractive industry mining in Africa, of course, there's a room of holding accountable the government of Germany, saying, so your contribution, your money you are sending to those mining activities are really making a problem, violating the right to water for community members, for instance. And also when Germany would enter into bilateral agreements with countries where, for instance, the money they will provide would, as I said before, will be used not only really to support the local communities or people who are really in need, but rather are used to open up some policies or some ways of liberalizing, let's say, land, and that people can come and make all this kind of monoculture where there's a promotion, let's say, of GMOs, and when you use GMOs and you use the pesticides at the same time, this has implication on the water, because they contaminate. Those pesticides contaminate the water. So there is a room, of course, always looking at those policies, looking at this involvement of, let's say, here we are talking about the German government, and we hold them accountable based on on these guidelines, of course, as an argument, but at the same time, of course, based on the international obligations under the extraterritorial obligations. And it's also very interesting because the Charter, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, recognize all international or other instruments that have been ratified by states. So in this regard, of course, this concerns, of course, the African state. But when we come to Germany, so then we will take a look on the extraterritorial obligations and refer to these guidelines.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. That was very helpful, your answer. Thanks a lot. Okay, I think we are coming to an end. It's 3 p.m. in Germany, and there are also no other questions. So I want to thank you, Valentin, for your input and the very helpful answers of questions. I've learned a lot. Thanks a lot again. I want to thank the audience. Thanks for listening. Thanks for contributing with your questions. Questions always help to get a deeper understanding of a topic. Thanks a lot. And also here now, there are also some of the participants that write, they thank you as well. And other questions, if there's another question is raised, maybe I can forward it to you by email, Valentin, and you can maybe answer later. So I want to close this online seminar, and you may check maybe after Easter on the YouTube channel of FIAN Germany. You can look for FIAN Germany, and you will find our channel. And maybe in the week after Easter, we will publish this so that you can listen to it again. And if you have any further question, don't hesitate to address them to us. I wish you a very nice Friday evening, nice weekend, and hope that we will meet at least online sometime again. Stay healthy, take care of any virus and other things which make you ill and make us ill. And I say goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Gertrude. Thank you. Bye.